Our next improvement is going to be to have our array set support iteration. So by iteration, what I mean is we're going to make our array set support syntax like this that we see on the slide. If we create a set object or a list object in Java, we can use the enhanced for loop to get each item out of the set, say for use with printing. So as an example, here I have a Java set, and if I say for int I and s, as we saw on the slide, in Java set, if we run this code, we see that over time, as we step through this code, I is first 5, then it is 23, and then it is 42, because those are the three numbers we put in. Okay, so that's what we want our code ultimately to be able to do. However, if you try and do this with our code, so we'll use our array set instead. Okay, in this case, we get an error. Doesn't work. So we want to somehow make it so that our set supports this fancy syntax. Okay, so if we try it using the array set, as we just saw, we get not applicable to type. You gave me an array set, but I was expecting one of these other things. So what I'm going to do now is strip away some of the magic here and explain what it is that Java is doing with its own set type. Okay. So it turns out that what we just saw, this nice iteration approach, can be replicated using this so-called ugly iteration approach. So in the ugly iteration approach, rather than just having this nice for loop, we're going to instantiate this mysterious type of object known as an iterator, and then call methods on that iterator in order to make the code do the iteration. So let me just show you what the code looks like, and then we will talk through how it works. So an alternate thing I could have done with my Java set is I could have said, let's make an iterator object that iterates over integers, and it is going to be created by calling the iterator method of the set interface. And we notice a little issue here, which is it says, I cannot resolve symbol iterator. Well, we could say java.util iterator to get the full name, or we can just go to the top of the file and say java.util iterator. Alternately, actually I should mention, since I like to teach these things, I could just click on iterator and then press Alt, Enter, and it automatically imports at the top of the file. Okay, so now that I've done this, I have an iterator, which I will call seer for reasons that will become clear. And then I'll say seer. As long as you have more stuff that you can see inside of the set, I would like you to get the next item. So int I equals seer.next. And then I'm going to print out I. Okay? And since this is an iterator that iterates over integers, we can assign the return value of this next operation to an int. If this had been string, though, for example, this wouldn't work because, well, the seer would be grabbing strings. All right, so here, when we run this code, let's just try running it through the debugger once more and visualize what's going on. So we get a seer object. We cannot see the internals of this object. We know it is a key iterator instance. Oh, I destroyed the arrow. All right, I didn't know you could do that. And then I'm going to click next. And then the seer will give me back my values one by one. At this point, we ask the seer, do you have more stuff? And it says yes, and so forth. Okay, so let's see that in cartoon format to make sure it's very, very clear what's going on here. So whenever we create this iterator object, and I call this a seer, basically we get a wizard. And what's the wizard doing? Well, the wizard is looking at the contents of the set. And we'll call this wizard our seer. It can see the insides of the set. So we ask the wizard, hey, do you have another value? And the seer says, well, yeah, I do. I'm looking right at it. Here it is. And then what I do is I ask the seer to get me the next value. Now this next method has two results. One is it returns the value that the wizard's currently looking at, namely 5. And the second is it causes the wizard to move forward to the next item. Okay? So it actually has this sort of twofold purpose, to advance and to return the current value. So after doing this, the wizard yells 5 and has stepped forward to the 23. At this point, we ask the seer, is there more? The seer says, yes, here it is. So I say, okay, wizard, please give me that value. And he yells 23 and takes the step forward. Now, at long last, we are at the end of the set. So we ask the wizard, is there something else? He says yes. We ask for that value, and he steps off the end of our array. and out of the set, so there's nothing left. And so on the next call to hasNext, the wizard will say false. Okay? So that's the basic idea behind how iterators work. They walk their way through the object, giving us information. So I have a question for you. What needs to happen in order? Let's look at this ugly code right here. So one of the secrets that we'll see soon is that this nice for loop here, the nice enhanced for loop, is just the ugly for loop in disguise. And so the question for you is, in order for the ugly iteration code to run, what does the compiler need to check? Okay? This is basically going to help us figure out what we need to do to make the array set work. So another way of thinking about this question is, what do we need to change about our array set so that we can call code that looks something like this? So think about each of these and ponder what the compiler checks in the ugly code to make sure that it's good. Okay, so the first thing it will check is, can I actually get back an iterator? From what? Oh, well, from the set interface. So make sure that the set interface has an iterator method. And then when it's looking at the usages of the iterator object, it sees that it's calling hasNext and next. So make sure that the iterator interface, this thing here, has a next and a hasNext method. Okay? So those are the things that we need to do. We're going to need our array set to give us objects using an iterator method, and we're going to need to make sure that our class, that the iterator object that's returned, has a next and a hasNext method. Okay? So in other words, to support ugly iteration, which we're now going to do in the video, we're going to add an iterator method to our array set that returns an iterator. And then we're going to make sure that the iterator object we return has a useful hasNext and next method. Okay? So to make sure that's 100% clear, I want the following code to work. I want to be able to say iterator integer. We'll call this aseer. So it's looking into an array set equals aset.iterator. So the array set is going to give me a wizard that can look inside of its contents. We will then say, while aseer.hasNext, we will say the item, or the next integer, is aseer.next. Oops. And then we will say system.out.println. Okay. All right. So we have one issue, which is we have not created this iterator method. Okay. Well, it needs to return an iterator. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to make a public iterator integer method, a method that returns a public iterator integer called iterator. And what it's supposed to do, returns an iterator, aka seer, into me, current object. Okay, how do I do that? Well, I need to return something that is an iterator. So I need to say return new something. What is that going to be? Well, I haven't made a class for it yet. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll say private class, we'll call this thing ArraySetIterator, for example. You can call it whatever you want, but I'll call it ArraySetIterator. Seems like a pretty good name. And it's supposed to implement the iterator integer interface. Now, what is that interface? Well, it needs to have a hasNext method and a next method. So I'll have public boolean hasNext, and I will have public integer next. Okay. So this ArraySetIterator is going to have these two methods, and here we're going to return a new ArraySetIterator. So this now, the ArraySetIterator and the iterator method, this right here is ready to go, the iterator method, but now we just need to fill in this class. So what's that going to look like? Well, we need to emulate basically this wizarding process, and so we could say that we want to keep track of the wizard's position. So I'll call it wizpos. And when you create a new ArraySetIterator, the original position of the wizard is going to be position 0. When I say hasNext, I'm just going to say, well, is the wizard position less than size? And if it is less than size, we know there's more stuff to get. And then lastly, the next method is going to, we're going to get the wizpos item. So we'll say int return item. Let's see, int return item. oh, you know, I've made a mistake, because it's not necessarily of integers, because it could be anything. Okay, maybe you caught that earlier. This should be iterator t, because we don't know the type, and likewise here, this should be iterator t. Okay, my apologies, because of course we want it to be able to handle any type. So anyway, continuing on, here this should be type t, and then we'll here say t return item equals the wizard position item, wizard position plus equals 1, and then return item. Okay. So at this point, we have created an iterator object that will now allow us to walk through our array. Let's just try running it and see if it works, and then we'll use the debugger to make sure that we really understand what's going on. So we try running this code, and we see that indeed we have 5, 23, 42, 5, 23, 42, and I have no idea what this message was that just popped up. And so this right here, it looks like it's working. Let's take a quick peek inside of what's going on. So if we run this through the visualizer, we can see here is our array set. And when we step in and create this iterator object, okay, we create an array set iterator with wizard position 0. And when we call hasNext, the wizard basically says, am I less than size? Okay, 3 is less than size, and so forth. We then grab the next item, which is in position 0, and I won't step through it here, but if you'd like to look at this very carefully, of course, you're welcome to download the code from the lecture code repository. All right, so there we saw it wasn't actually that crazy. I mean, there was nothing super new here. I did mess up on this type, but modulo that little tricky detail, not so bad, I think. Okay. So in the end, what we ended up with, right, to support ugly iteration, we had to create this method called iterator that returns an object of type iterator, and that of course required us to create a class that actually does the work. Okay, so we ended up with something like this code. Okay, so that's nice. We can now support ugly iteration. However, if we were to actually try and use the for each loop, the enhanced for loop, so let's try that real quick. Guess I'll get rid of this stuff. We don't really care about it anymore. Okay, so what we could do here is we could say for int I in a seer. This would be nice iteration. So we try and do this, we get this error. For each not applicable. You are giving me an array set, but I'm expecting something else. Okay? Ooh, it's a tiny problem here. And by the way, this should say a set. Okay. So we're trying to iterate through my array set, but it's still not working. Okay. So why? So even though we support ugly iteration, you may remember earlier I mentioned that secretly this code on the left, this nice for loop, is shorthand for the code on the right. Now the problem that Java is having right now is that it does not know that our array set has an iterator method. You and I can see it. I mean, it's right there, right? This method is in the array set class, but Java doesn't know. You may recall that when it comes to inheritance relationships in Java, you have to formally state your what interfaces you implement for anybody to know that you have certain methods. So luckily, there is an interface for that called Iterable. Okay? Not to be confused with iterator. This could be a little confusing at first. So if you claim to be part of the Iterable Interface, that is, if you claim that you implement it, then you must have a method that returns iterators, and that method must be called iterator. Okay? So in other words, I'm saying this. If I go up here and I say implements iterable t, I am declaring to the world that I have an iterator method. Now that I've done that, the enhanced for loop can work, because what this thing is looking for is it wants to make sure that the array set class has an iterator method, so that it can do all of this stuff here, that it can make this call. Okay? So in other words, just to show you one more time, without this, even though we support ugly iteration, Java doesn't know. Right? It doesn't know that there exists an iterator method that it can use. So in order to declare to the main method or to the compiler that we have an iterator method, we say implements iterable. And that's a way of saying I have an iterator method. Okay? So we basically put our array set in the inheritance hierarchy of the iterable interface, and our iteration will now work. Now as it happens, this is just the same way that sets work in Java. So it turns out that if you look at the source code of set, you can see that it extends the collection interface. So this interface extends this interface. And then the collection interface extends iterable. And then iterable has this iterator method. So in other words, when we try to use an enhanced for loop on a set, it will work fine because it knows that it inherited this iterator method from somewhere up higher. By the way, just to mention, you can actually go looking at the source code of the actual stuff of Java. Here's some links I provided. And you can see, okay, well, this is what a set looks like. So this file was originally made in 1997 and has been updated many times since. And you can see all the stuff that's there. And it is very well documented. In fact, there's more documentation than there is code. And that's pretty common for real-world library code. Okay, so there's quite a lot there. So just to summarize what we did. Ultimately, what I wanted was the ability to do this with my array sets, because it's nice to be able to print it out, and we'll also see that it's useful for other purposes in the next video. So to do that, we had to add an iterator method that returns an iterator. We had to make sure that the object that we returned, that is the private class that we built, that it has a useful hasNext and next method. And then finally, we had to declare to the world that we have an iterator method by saying our current class, ArraySet, implements iterable t. So there's a lot of jargon there. And so homework 1 will give you an opportunity to really try this out. So when you get there, you'll get to really think deeply about the difference between iterable and iterator. All right, we got a little more to do, but our ArraySet class is looking pretty good.